Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin shares what sometimes frustrated him about the HBO series. Martin's still unfinished book series A Song of Ice and Fire served as the inspiration for the fantasy show set in the fictional world of Westeros. But of course Game of Thrones the show ultimately grew beyond the limits of Martin's original vision, running out of book material to adapt in Season 5. Martin himself indeed recently revealed that he personally had less to do with the later seasons of Game of Thrones, ultimately being cut out of the loop by showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss. It can never be known now how things would have turned out story-wise on God had Martin been allowed to give his input during the final run of shows. But it's certainly true that Game of Thrones Season 8 was very divisive when it ran on HBO back in 2019, and continues to be controversial to this day. Now with the first Game of Thrones spin-off House of the Dragon set to launch on HBO, Martin is once again talking about the original series and his experience with its making. Speaking to the official Game of Thrones podcast, House of the Dragon, Martin addressed the way the show handled his characters, and admitted to having mixed feelings about the way some of them evolved. Martin began by saying that it's exciting if the characters are being done right, but cautioned there's always dangers. He then spoke briefly about one occasion when the show's version of a character did not reflect what he intended when he created them on the page. After first talking about an example of a good experience involving a scene with Arya and Ned Stark from Season 1, Martin talked about a bad experience from later on. Martin naturally does not name the exact character he thought was a bad representation of his version from the books. Obviously the author does not wish to shame whatever actor was responsible for what he thinks was a mistaken interpretation of his intent. He also surely does not think it necessary to stir up fans who already have a lot of negative feelings about the way Game of Thrones finished up its run. It's safe to say however that Martin himself has mixed feelings about some of the choices that were made on Game of Thrones, especially in later seasons after showrunners Benioff and Weiss had cut him out of the loop. It's also safe to say that many fans agree with Martin about certain characters going off the rails as the show proceeded. Perhaps one day Martin will actually finish his A Song of Ice and Fire series and give frustrated Game of Thrones fans the alternate ending they crave. The author may not have had full control over what happened on the show, but he obviously can make any character-related choices he wants when it comes to the page. Source: the official Game of Thrones podcast, House of the Dragon.